Welcome everybody, today we're going to be talking about the Terror Zones and the Sunder Charms, including things like drop rates and what I've kind of heard over the past week, now that it's kind of been a week since the ladder launch. How do they feel? So let's get into it. Now the Sunder Charm drop rate does seem to fluctuate very highly between player counts. Now to just give a little bit of a recap, the Sunder Charms started dropping about 2.5 hours in. We were the first group to start farming Terror Zones. I ended up getting the first Cold Rupture and it happened to roll perfect, which was really cool. And then there was that bug that we discovered not too far afterwards where the Barbarian Hork could just get a guaranteed drop. This was very short-lived. I know that some people saw that video and were like, holy crap, they're just constantly happening and all that. To be clear, that was patched within hours after it was discovered that next morning. And that's not to say we got all of our charms just from that glitch either. There were many charms that were just dropping in general. Again, we were in an 8-player party, so our drops were actually pretty crazy. Now, talking about that subject a little bit, it seems to be that in the Terror Zones, your drops are greatly increased by player count. For example, in a player's 8 game where you're all farming together, the drop rate seems to be about 1 every 10 minutes. Or equivalent to maybe like an Amrune dropping. Now if you're farming solo, from what I've heard, it seems like you'll get 1 per hour, and all these numbers will depend highly on how efficient your character is at farming, what zone is actually terrorized, but generally speaking, 1 per hour if you're playing solo, and 1 per 10 minutes if you're playing in a group. I heard accounts of people saying they found 3 in an hour. I heard accounts of people saying they found only 1 for 3 hours. But the overall thing is that these charms are actually not that rare. And another thing to talk about with the Terror Zones is that these have a weighted treasure class. Now what does that mean? Well, I'll break down what a treasure class is really quickly. This is basically a pool of items that is chosen for the game to drop. I'll give you a couple examples. Treasure Class 87 or TC 87 are things like Sacred Armor, Archon Staves, Coronas, Myrmidon Greaves, all of that. So items like Griffin's Eye, Crown of Ages, Tyrell's Might, Templars, Mang's Song, Shadow Dancers are all in those super high treasure classes. And when you're in a higher level area, these items tend to drop way more often. I talked to Mr. Llama for a little bit, and he was saying that after grinding to 98.8, he had only found 2 Vexes and 1 Burr Rune. Now, just so you can understand what that means, that is a horrible drop rate of high runes for that many hours he's put into the game. In addition to that, he said he didn't find any Shakos, but he found Crown of Ages and tons of those other TC87s like we talked about. Not that this is a bad thing, but it means that he won't be dropping some of those ticket items like Shako, Wartravs, or anything of the exceptional tier just because the monster's TC weight is so high. Now just for a quick recap of what we talked about, basically higher player count is what you want if you want a Sunder Charm, and if you want high TC 87 items like Griffins or Crown of Ages, you want to farm these areas, but not necessarily if you want to try to find Shako or Wartravs or Viper Magi. Now there's one more factor that plays really heavily into all of the drop rates and experience gain that you get, and that is the RNG of what the Terror Zone actually is. There's a list on Maxroll of what Terror Zones are good and bad. There's a Terror Zone tier list that I have on YouTube as well, you can check that out. But if you look at that list, you can see that there are not a ton of them that are in the high S tier, and there's actually a ton of them that are really bad. If you get a bad sequence of a bunch of Terror Zones, so if you get Stony Field over and over again, it's not looking good for you to try to find a lot of stuff or to get a lot of experience. However, if you get something like Worldstone Keep or Chaos Sanctuary or even Tombs, these places are absolutely poppin', and you will get tons of items there and potentially a lot of experience. So with the heavy RNG, this means that people can come home from work, and yes, they might be able to clear the areas with the Sunder Charms and the immunities, if they were lucky enough to get one in the first place, but then the area might not actually be that profitable to farm for the time that they have to play. In other words, there are some really bad Terror Zones to actually farm. So I wanted to actually make a couple suggestions on maybe what we could do in the future. Terrorizing either multiple zones at once, which is probably the better idea of the two I'm going to suggest, or you could make it so the whole act is actually terrorized. The only problem with the whole act being terrorized is that people are just going to pick the best spot for that act. Let's say cows, if you get Act 1, tombs if you get Act 2. But that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today, is just kind of some of the information that we've gathered so far, and some of my thoughts after playing the game for a little bit, and hearing some of the other streamers' thoughts that I've talked to recently. Just wanted to relay this information to you guys. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the Season 2. What was the craziest thing you found in the terror zones? Let me know in the comments below. Have you gotten a lot of high runes? Because it seems like those things are dry. Anyways, much love to all of you. You are all beasts.